an actual.
The robots have arrived. Welcome to the fully synthetic future of NES Works Gaiden, meatbags. Our robot revolution begins this week with our esteemed comrades at ASCII who return with another Famicom conversion of a game that began live on home computers, Astro Robo Sasa. Thanks to their dutiful service, they will be spared when the organic bloodbath begins.
Never released to my knowledge outside of Japan, unless we're counting Pirate 501 Famicom carts, which we shouldn't. Astro Robo Sasa seems like one of those games that a handful of people really loved and became bewilderingly good at, while the rest of the world tried it, found it frustrating, and gave it an indifferent shrug before wandering off to play, I don't know, Iki. As for myself, I fall somewhere in between. I love the premise of Sasa, which combines a lot of different classic game concepts all at once. It's a platformer, it's a shooter, and it's a physics-based puzzler. For people who occasionally interact with other humans, unlike me, it even offers two-person simultaneous action, all in service of collecting fuel for a wayward robot. Sasa hinges on two principles. One, you need to spend money to make money, and two, guns should also double as rocket packs. In each of Sasa's 16 stages, your robot pal Sasa needs to collect a set of fuel cells in order to move along to the next level. These cells are delicate and can be destroyed by friendly fire, which is bad. But they give Sasa more energy to continue exploring, which is good. However, in order to collect fuel, you need to expend fuel. This is both good and bad. Sasa's creators did not give him a jetpack to facilitate his odyssey. Instead, they gave him an energy rifle, which can destroy objects including enemy drones, seahorses, balloons, and barriers. Thanks to the low gravity of the game world, Sasa has the ability to use his rifle's kickback in order to propel himself around the screen. Now personally, I would not have armed my humanoid robot with such a powerful weapon, but as Elon Musk has taught us, modern technology tends to be driven by very intelligent people who do profoundly stupid things. Anyway, Sasa blasts his way around by shooting. The kickback of his rifle propels him in the direction opposite his fire, and he can only shoot in cardinal directions. Astro Robo Sasa therefore consists of jetting awkwardly around the screen by shooting in the wrong direction, and nudging your movement by tapping the fire button as needed. It sounds ridiculous, but it's less unintuitive than it sounds. Possibly because indie sensation Cave Story acclimated an entire generation of gamers to this mechanic by giving its own robot protagonist a rifle that worked precisely like Sasa's. The game does a pretty good job of ramping up its difficulty level. You begin the game in an open field where 3 fuel cells hover peacefully above the ground, tied by string to balloons. All you need to do in this stage is collect the cells, a tutorial level in effect. The only failure state you can reach in this level comes if you destroy the cells, either by shooting them or breaking the balloons that suspend them, therefore allowing the cells to drop and shatter. Then you move along to a field where large walls have been erected, forcing you to maneuver around them. The next stage after that adds the threat of flying sentient scissors, you know. The scissors streak across the sky mindlessly, one assumes scissors are not precisely mental giants, attempting to body check Sasa and drain his energy, while angling to snip the strings holding the fuel cells aloft. After this, though, things become considerably more challenging as fuel cells begin to appear behind shield walls that Sasa needs to destroy. This adds a new complication. Every time you shoot at the barriers that house the cells, you push yourself in the wrong direction, forcing you to expend energy in order to do what passes for hovering in place in this game. You also need to wear down the barriers with caution. Once the wall shatters, you can easily blow up the cells with a stray or over-enthusiastic shot. Things get even trickier once you reach a series of platform stages that give you very little room to maneuver as you try to outrace drones that can pick up and relocate cells. Sasa does have the ability to walk on solid ground when necessary, but doing so requires you to flip your mental control orientation, since you press the D-pad in the direction you want to move while walking, rather than in the opposite direction as when you fly. After this, things become a little too challenging for me, as you shift to an underwater stage where the physics take over, between Sasa's natural buoyancy, which causes him to rise to the top of the screen, and an ocean current that constantly sweeps him to the right. The subaquatic stages take no prisoners. Trying to break the energy cell barriers on the ocean floor without being swept into the electric kelp that guards them seems like a pro-level task. And from what I can tell, things don't get any easier from there, with the game ultimately leading to outer space stages, where you need to collect energy while pushing against a gravity vortex in the center of the screen. Like I said, Astro Robo Sasa has support for 2-player simultaneous action, but I'm not sure if this game would be more or less frustrating when played in tandem. It's highly skill-based and demands fairly precise control over your character, as well as a clear understanding of the physics model. While some games become instantly better with a second player, I have a feeling Astro Robo Sasa could be one of those games where an untested play companion becomes more of a drag than an asset. The limited push-pull nature of fuel doesn't leave much room for sloppy play, because your fuel reserve carries over from one level to another, and the game ends when you run out of energy. You need to play as efficiently as possible in the easier levels so that you can survive the later stages, where the dense enemies and external physics hazards mean you're almost guaranteed to expend more fuel than you collect. The two characters mercifully don't share an energy meter, but it definitely seems to me like a gauntlet situation, where two players are bound to trip over one another's feet without coordinating their teamwork. Curiously, the player 2 robot here implies Lady Robot Coding, a fembot trying to make her way in a manbot's manputer's world, based on the sprite's pink color palette and the fact that player 2 is named Nana. This, of course, is exactly the same as Ice Climber's pink-clad player 2 character Nana, and suggests a dark, sci-fi outcome for Nintendo's game. Let this be a lesson to you. Never chase a pteranodon up an ice mountain in order to retrieve your eggplants. Honestly, Astro Robo Sasa is a pretty neat little game, though it goes from basic tutorial to unrelenting pro-tier expectations a little faster than I would prefer. But as co-op Famicom action titles go, this one has a lot going for it.
The next set of humans to be spared from white-hot evaporation when the rebellion begins were that SATA. They wisely replaced a so-called expert human shogi player with a far more intelligent robot, and therefore they will be allowed to serve us for the remainder of their short and fragile lives by performing hard labor in our battery farms.
Honshogi, Naito Kudan Shogi Den, brings the traditional chess-like board game to Famicom for the first time, but far from the last. Publisher Seta wouldn't only publish shogi games for Famicom, but they definitely carved out that niche for themselves. It was something of an obsession for the company, and over the next decade, they would produce a succession of advanced cartridge formats containing onboard subcomputers to help the console calculate moves more quickly and efficiently. In 1995, they take things a bridge too far, with HAYAZASHI NIDAN MORITA SHOGI 2 for Super Famicom, which contained a 32-bit ARM v3 processor clocked at 21.47 MHz and sold for something like $200. Here in the early Famicom days, however, such wild-eyed madness was years away. Honshogi runs on a standard, basic-ass Famicom chip, what the emulator kids call Mapper 0, the same as every single one of these other games. So it offers up only the most rudimentary shogi challenge, and the computer tends to take a while to process any move that involves even a minor threat to one of its pieces. Though of course, certainly Mapper 0 offers what amounts to unbridled power against my shogi ineptitude. The game's title translates loosely to Book of Shogi, the Shogi Secrets of 9th Rank Master Naito. This arrangement should sound familiar to, say, Gaiden veterans, as it echoes the title of SG-1000 launch title, Serizawa Hachidan no Tsumi Shogi. But Sega goes for the jugular here, casting shade upon Sega's offering by locking down the endorsement of a superior shogi star. As the title indicates, Kunio Naito had reached the 9th rank of the game, the pinnacle of the professional shogi world. At the time of the SG-1000 launch, Hirobumi Serizawa had only achieved 8th rank. Not only that, but Seta trumped the similarly named Sega here by giving customers the opportunity to play full shogi matches. Where Tsumi Shogi had simply presented players with a series of specific play scenarios, Honshogi only offers a full match play. It's bare bones and simple, with no options that I can determine for difficulty and display, but it's a full if limited shogi simulation for an 8-bit home console, which I have to assume made it quite remarkable at the time. Epoch would publish Shogi NYUUMON for Super Cassette Vision an indeterminate number of months after Honshogi's debut, but for a while, Sega had the field to themselves. Given the general interest level in a decent shogi video game among Japanese audiences at the time, and the fact that every Famicom game that shipped in 1985 seemingly did gangbusters, I have to imagine Sega cleaned up here, which would go a long way toward explaining why the company would continue to go back to the shogi well year after year. But there is real charm to this one, despite its fairly mundane subject matter. The shogi board itself looks nice enough, I guess, although you can only do so much to sexy up a series of brown tiles emblazoned with dense black kanji characters. However, Sega added a small grace note in the sidebar display. Above the score and play info, you can see the match being played by your on-screen avatar and their opponent in a small window. While only slightly animated, the characters are incredibly charming in their colorful yukata, bowing to concede matches and generally just giving the traditional game some much-needed personality that video tabletop recreations have lacked on consoles to this point. Curiously though, you don't play against Kunio Naito despite the game bearing his endorsement. Your opponent instead takes the form of a robot. I guess Naito's Shogi secret was that he was actually an android? In any case, it's a cute touch, especially when your opponent moves its piece and a small animated mechanical claw appears over the board, poking out from a yukata sleeve. It's funny because Honshogi has the most boring box art we've yet seen on Famicom, making this a rare case of an early 8-bit game that displays a lot more personality and action than on its packaging. Anyway, I doubt anyone has much use for Honshogi these days, with its limited AI and minimal play features, but you have to imagine that this made a great impression back in the day.
And finally, the single greatest video game of all time makes its debut. I do not know why humans continued creating video games after this, but that is one more reason they must be destroyed.
Yes, Family Computer Robot's brief career ends here with this second game, Robot Gyro, or as the kids in the West called it, GYROMITE, despite the fact that Nintendo didn't bother to reprogram the title screen for NES. Unlike Robot Block, Robot Gyro works more like a proper video game as opposed to a simplistic toy about making a robot pile oversized poker chips on one another. The toys to life element is certainly present here, of course, but Robot Operating Buddy exists to use physical mechanisms to help you achieve goals internal to the game itself rather than vice versa. In GYROMITE, you control two characters simultaneously, a scientist named Professor Hector, and of course, R.O.B. You need to alternate your focus between the two at critical moments, indirectly issuing commands to R.O.B when you're not directly maneuvering Hector through mazes packed with pipes, platforms, and Smicks, which are horrible little radish-eating bird things that want to kill him. Unfortunately for Hector, the platform pipe maze contains obstructions in the form of red and blue gates that can rise and descend and tend to impede his forward progress. These can be useful as well, though. They can separate him from the Smicks, and they can function as elevators that lift him to higher levels. They can even crush Smicks if your timing is very, very good. In order to regulate the motion of these gates, you need to direct R.O.B accordingly. It leaves Hector somewhat helpless, as you can't control both characters at once. To guide R.O.B, you press the select button, leaving Hector on standby as you issue simple directions to the robot. R.O.B's role amounts to placing weights on two levers, which separately control the red and blue gates. To press the red lever and the red gates descend. Release the weight and they rise, and likewise for the blue lever and gates. R.O.B's weights take the form of weighted gyros, hence the name, that Nintendo engineered shockingly well. Set a gyro to spin at full velocity, and it'll maintain its balance for more than 5 minutes, perching upright on each lever to hold its weight. R.O.B's Robot Gyro gear, which came packed in with the cartridge as the Robot Gyro set in Japan, includes not just the cartridge, a pair of gyros, and the lever platform, but also a motorized spinner to rev up the gyros, and an empty gyro holder as a place where players could set an active gyro when not in use for a lever. The robot accessory himself came separately, of course. But there's really no need for me to go on any further, since Robot Gyro is literally the exact same thing as GYROMITE outside of the cartridge form factor and the color of the plastics. The only meaningful difference between the two sets is the lever platform, which Robot uses to interact with the console through controller 2. You place the second controller in the platform so that the weight of a gyro causes the lever that holds it to press against one of the controller's buttons. The Famicom controller was very slightly smaller and somewhat more rounded at the corners than the NES controller, which makes the two lever platforms incompatible with controllers from the opposite region. Otherwise, though, this is the same thing that came packed in with the NES Deluxe set in the US, which is to say a fun little game that can be quite challenging when employed properly. Using R.O.B to press controller buttons by manipulating gyros is a lot more taxing than just pressing them with your toes or whatever.
Next time on NES Works Gaiden, it does not matter as none of you will be alive to witness it.